Today's conversation podcast. You are truly going to enjoy today's podcast. Today I'm hosting Prince Akashambatwa Mbikusita-Lewanika. He's a very distinguished son of the soil here. You know him holding many positions and portfolios, and he has participated in the civic, political, and economic affairs of our country. He's been a leading light, especially on public commentary and traditional matters. Honorable Mbikusita-Lewanika, welcome to today's conversation podcast.
Thank you so much, Emmanuel. We've been meeting and discussing all sorts of things for so many years over in many forums, in many, maybe even in many countries.
Yes, sir.
But this is the greatest opportunity we have had to really have an open conversation, and I welcome it very, very much. It's a great honor, it's a pleasure, and I look forward to this.
Now, I'd like to thank you for making time. I've been pursuing you for some time, but at least you really, truly found time to come and be on this program and give some insights as we review Zambia at 60. Zambia is far older than 60, of course, but I thought that you could give some remarkable insight to the life of our country, what we've done in the past and what we could do better. Many people know you. You are a household name. And they know you wearing various forms, various jackets. But who is Akashambatwa Mbikusita-Lewanika?
Well, I think we'll find out a little bit in that. First of all, I was born in 1948 in Kanakitwe, in Lusaka-9th African Mine Workers Township. Both the place I was born at, the year I was born at, seems to have had providence things happening. 1948, this is the year when the first trade union, African trade union, was established. This is the year the first overtly political organization, the Northern Rhodesia African Congress, was made. And this was the year at a global level when the Human Rights Declaration was made by the United Nations. And what makes those things even more significant is that in terms of trade union movement, political movement, and I should also add the social workers' welfare movement, my father was very much involved. And in those days, activists, political leaders, community leaders, they did not leave your home and go to meetings. The meetings were taking place in my home. And the African Mine Workers Township, I was born in Lusaka-9th. The section of Lusaka-9th in which I grew up most was called Maspesha, which is the special quarters.
Yes.
And the neighborhood also is significant. For instance, across the road was Mr. Katilungu's house, Lawrence Katilungu, and next to his house was Mr. Dilax Nkoloma, who was the Secretary General, and they were the Secretary General and President of the Northern Rhodesia Mine Workers at the same time. And in the neighborhood also, we had all the key clerical African staff, senior staff, who came from Tanganyika, Nyasaland, and Southern Rhodesia, and other parts of Northern Rhodesia, and Barotseland. So that is the sort of place I was born into. And all those ingredients to which I was born have followed me all my life. So that is basically
you cannot speak casually about the history of trade unions and social movements in a casual manner, because your father was part of the spearhead of that? Just speak briefly about that.
Well, let's talk about trade unions.
Yeah.
When my father, I think there was a topic you wanted to discuss about me, but the same topic could be said about my father.
Correct.
That having gone to England with Lutunga Yeta III in 1937 for the coronation of King George VI, he had chosen my father, who was his younger brother, to accompany him, while the Ngambela, the prime minister, had chosen Mr. Su, who was secretary for the Kuta. So the four of them went. When they came back, instead of him celebrating this great opportunity, he found himself being falsely charged with all sorts of issues, which the short of it is that after a couple of years he was banished from the capital of Barotseland. And what was significant was that his brother, the king, was very unhappy about what the Kuta were doing, but he could do nothing about it. So after he was banished, he was called to the palace, and the Lutunga told him he was very afraid that he may get annoyed and just leave.
Yeah.
And go away, because he had just recalled him in 1935 from where he was working in Livingstone to come and be his private secretary.
Yeah.
So he thought he would now go back. And while he was in Livingstone, when he went to Livingstone, he has just come from Fort Hare College.
Yes.
The same Fort Hare
Mandela's,
Mbeki's, went to in Cape Town at the age of 23. Then the other princes and other senior Induna's children who came with them sort of like settled, got jobs. His nephew, Kalueyeta, who was the son of the then Lutunga, but they were age mates. They were even born on the same day.
Yeah.
And they were best friends. Became private secretary. So he had no job. So he decided to go to Livingstone, which was very adventurous. While in Livingstone, he became the founder secretary of the first urban welfare association in Zambia, the Livingstone one. As everybody should know that the first one was started at Mwenzo.
Yes, in
under the
1912.
chairmanship of Mr. Donald Swale.
Yes.
And President Kaunda's father was also one of the founders of those, 1924. So having been in Livingstone, there were also other adventures there, apart from founding this association, the first urban welfare association.
Yes.
They also in 1933 tried to start a Congress movement. That was the first Congress attempt to have African
Some form
National
of a political
Congress.
party. Yes.
It was it didn't go very far. Then another group of people, this time my father was not involved, in 1937 also attempted, and it also didn't go far. So prophetically, so when I was saying 1948, they started the Northern Rhodesia African Congress.
Yeah.
This is really after almost more than a decade of attempting to
establish. Yes.
But going back to his banishment, after he was banished, he didn't go to Livingstone. He found a job in Fort Jameson in Chipata, working for some European called Thorncroft. Some of his
it's a famous name.
Some of his Afro-African offsprings are well known.
Yeah, the Thorncrofts. Yes.
But he didn't stay too long. So in 1941, he went to Kitwe in Ghana. He was offered a job in Kitwe as a senior clerk. At that time, 41 was exactly 6 years after there had been revolts on the copper belt by the African workers. After that, the mining companies started a system of trying to have representation of Africans, they chose the tribal one. So Europeans were very good, something we haven't done very well after independence. They didn't get bogged down that, oh, there are so many communities, so many languages. They will just group you, 2, 3 of you in one group, and then choose one of you. So they were tribal leaders chosen by the mines to kind of represent workers, be between the workers and them. But by 1941, that tribal approach had broken down. So when my father went to Kitwe, the leadership of representing African was detribalized. So there were the groups that were formed, firstly informally, were representing all the workers.
Okay.
Regardless of whether they were Tukuyus from
Tanzania,
or
from Nyasaland,
or whatever. So, and this was in the middle of the so-called Second World War. The Second World War government in Britain was a coalition government, which included the Conservatives, the Liberals, and the Labour. And the Labour Party, the Labour Party was in charge of workers. So as part of their internationalism, you could say, they sponsored a gentleman called William Corey, sent him to Northern Rhodesia to try to see if he could promote trade unionism. The person he worked with was my father. Okay. So they went around the Copper Belt up to Kabwe, promoting the idea of trade unionism. So it took about 3 to 4 years.
For the idea?
For the idea, just propagating. Until in 1948, the first trade union was formed. For some reason, it wasn't by the miners. The first trade union was the workers in stores, shop. They were not shopkeepers because they didn't own the shops. But the workers in the European shops were the first people to form a trade union in 1948. But the same year, the mine workers trade union was formed. It was a very democratic process. And there were elections. And my father stood for the position of president together with Mr. Katilungu, and Mr. Katilungu won.
Yes.
What is interesting of that generation, positions didn't matter. Because they were volunteers. They had their jobs, then they had this assignment on behalf of their fellow workers. So for a couple of years, the trade unionists were volunteers. So that, in fact, when in 1950, I don't want to jump too much, my father had to go to India, he had to go to Europe, including Switzerland, and he had other jobs. In India, he was going as president of the African National Congress. In Europe, he was going as a translator of the Bible into Lozi because the missionaries were there. Then I look at the letters of reference that he was carrying. One was from Mr. Katilungu, who said he's a very good member of our trade union. Another one was from Reverend Kasokolo, who later on became, the same year in 1948, by the way, this is the first time that 2 indigenous Africans became members of the Legislative Assembly. And one of them was Reverend Kasokolo. The other one was Nelson Nalumango. So he also had a reference from Mr. Kasokolo, saying he's a very good member of their church because he was a Methodist.
Yes.
So basically the trade union movement, my father was very involved in it.
Instrumental.
In fact, ahead of Mr. Katilungu, because Mr. Katilungu had first worked as a miner in Katanga, and then crossed over, I think in 1936. Then he worked underground. Later on, he was one of the few Bembas who were promoted to be clerks above ground. And that also, I think Zambians should understand, because some of our problems are not really inherently tribal. It so happened that the majority of clerks in the mines came from the areas where you had advanced education. So many of the clerks came from Livingstonia in Malawi. So many of them were from Malawi, mostly Tumbukas, Hengas, and that sort of area. Some were Barosi. There were also a few from Mbeleshi. But from the northern province, there were very, very few. And Mr. Katilungu was one of those. And normally when you read our history, each time they mention my father, they say he's a prince. What? Mr. Katilungu was also a prince. Yeah. In fact, the one who was Chitimukulu in the early 50s was his uncle. And the present Chitimukulu is his nephew.
Yes, correct.
So he was as royal as my father.
Your father, yes.
But because sometimes politically it's more important to say this one is a prince than this one, but they both were. So basically...
You mentioned that your father traveled to India as leader or president of the African National Congress. Now, many people, when they talk about the African National Congress, they remember Harry Mwanga Nkumbula. But your father appears to have preceded Harry Mwanga Nkumbula. Just briefly explain that.
Well, let me bring in my mother.
Okay.
I hope the women will know how gender sensitive I am. And it's on account of my mother.
Yeah.
My mother and Mr. Kapwepwe and Mr. Nkumbula was the first 3 teachers at Usakile Primary School. Mr. Nkumbula was headmaster.
Yes.
My mother taught ordinary school. Mr. Kapwepwe taught adults. So that Mr. Nkumbula left for Makerere, I think in 1946.
Makerere University in Uganda,
yes. 1946. I've read in almost, it's always credited that Go Brown is the one who recommended him. It's never mentioned that the one who recommended Mr. Nkumbula to Go Brown was my father.
Wow, yeah.
Because it was...
Go Brown, the builder of the famous castle in Chinsali.
Yes, because he was a member of the Legislative Council representing Africans. So all the community leaders that we had, whether political or welfare, would look at him like their representative.
Okay.
So all their missions, you know, they refer to him. They did, of course, have some differences with him. Again, the same 1946, but let's finish with Mr. Nkumbula. So he went to Makerere. After Makerere, he stayed in Makerere for 1 year, where he seems to have done very well. So well, Makerere was a university college of the University of London. So he went to London University to continue with his studies. So when Congress was founded in 48, Mr. Nkumbula was not there.
Oh, he was in UK at school.
In UK. Mr. Nkumbula came back from UK on my father's 3rd term. They had 1 year terms.
Oh,
I'm sure the modern politicians think that is too late. So they elected leadership every year.
Okay.
So he was elected in 48, was elected in 49,
in 1950.
Was elected in 50, and then in 1951, by that time Mr. Nkumbula had come.
Returned.
And then Mr. Nkumbula became president.
Okay.
He defeated my father in the election. There is also a conflict. He himself, my father said he lost by 1 vote. But many records said he only got 1 vote.
Oh, I see.
But I think there was a question of language.
Yes. Yes.
Because my father said, in fact, he did not vote for himself because he preferred Mr. Chileshe.
Oh, okay.
The Chileshe, who later became the first African mayor of Lusaka.
Yes. Oh, okay. Okay.
Who had also been in London and was a great friend of Serese Khama. Mr. Chileshe was a great friend of Serese
Khama Botswana.
While they were in London. So that is the sort of group. So my father was involved in the founding of the trade union movement.
And the African National Congress. He actually
and the African National
provided
Congress,
leadership
yes.
for 3 years.
And before that, the same critical 46. 46 is also an interesting year because one, the Europeans formed a political party which they called the Labour Party, led by Roy Welensky. Who was then a train driver, resident in Kabwe. And in reaction to that, the Kitwe African Society, by the way, in 1944, my father became president of the Kitwe African Society, which almost became the forefront of the Welfare Association because it was more involved in politics and other things.
Yes.
And they proposed that the welfare associations in the country, in Northern Rhodesia, should federate. And then the Federation of Northern Rhodesia Welfare Societies were formed in 1946. It was like a counterpart to the
political party.
Since we were not in the Legislative Council. So this was like a party in the making outside the Legislative Council. And when this meeting met to constitute that, Mr. Yumba became the president. Then Mr. Lipalile, who was treasurer for the Kitwe, became vice president. Mr. Yumba by then was head of the Welfare Association in Luansha. He had also been head of the Welfare Association in Kabwe. He had also been involved in some early welfare associations in Livingstone.
Yes.
So they were very cosmopolitan groups. And then in 1948, which was a critical year, even on a global basis, the politics were now heating up. India had become independent in 47. And so in 1948, again, the Kitwe Welfare Association proposed that the Welfare Federation should be reconstituted into a political organization. And when they met to constitute it, my father became the founder president general. Then Mr. Yumba became his vice president. Mr. Yumba was elected vice president in absentia. But most interestingly was that although he was absent, our mother, his wife, was the first person to give a gift to the Congress because she brought a gift which came from Mwata Kazembe. So Mwata Kazembe was the first donor to the Northern Rhodesia African Congress in a donation which was presented to the meeting by Mrs. Yumba, who was himself not there but was elected as vice president. Then the former vice president of the welfare was elected treasurer of that. Mr. Nabuliato, who I'm sure is
who later became renowned speaker for many years,
became the first secretary, general secretary. They called. The president was called General President, and then the secretary was General Secretary, Mr. Nabuliato, 1948. Now, my father, and I think his whole generation, were very conscious of the educational handicap we had. So that even though they were in politics, part of their major program was how to promote education. This is why in 46, my father supported Mr. Nkumbula going for further education to Makerere. In 50, he supported 2 teachers from Usakire, Mr. Kapwepwe and another one, in fact 3, all of them were Usakire teachers. One interesting thing is that I have a letter from one of our uncles, Mr. Amatende, who became one of the early real big businessmen in Kitwe, recommending for my father to say, if you have 3 scholarships, he has 5 Barosi people to recommend who are very good boys.
Yeah.
This scholarship, which my father negotiated with Prime Minister Nehru and got from India, were basically to him. And he decided that one of them should go to Mr. Kapwepwe from Chinsali, the other one should go from another person who was Kaonde, but from the Copper Belt, and then Barosi, who was Mbunda. They are the first one who went to India in 1951.
He didn't look at it that let me give my kin and kith the opportunity. They were nationalistic in approach all the time.
Even in his statements in India, one of the things he said in at least 3 of his speeches was that we are basically above tribe. We are Africans. So that was basically the policy. So when you look at later years, policies of tribal balancing, and so, it was there from the very beginning. As I said, by 1940-41, the tribal representation of workers in the mines had broken down. The leadership was now not based on each leader looking after his tribe and then reporting on that. So that issue was also available for that. And
that's why I had to, because in the casual manner you had mentioned your father, he just looked like an ordinary father, but he was not. And as a history you have just demonstrated, is right at the core and foundation of our country. And
yes, and
the trade unions, welfare societies, and later political parties is then what drove us to independence.
In fact, the same people who were spearheading the worker welfare are the same people who have spearheaded the formation of trade union. They are the same people who spearheaded the political parties. And they did so as volunteers. They were not full-time. By the time I was even old enough, by the time Mr. Katilungu and Dilax in Koloma, who were in our neighborhood, moved from the neighborhood because they ceased to be workers of Rokana mine. They became full-time workers of the trade union, and they had to move out of
they were running the party secretariat.
They had to move out of the mine workers compound.
So they went
to what is that? Buchi, Kwacha, that area. We used to call it Richard Costed because it was built by a company called Richard Costed. In fact, some of my first political songs, I have 2 early political songs which I remember from childhood. One was about Mr. Nkumbula.
How was it going? Would you remember?
I remember it very well. But one of my bestest friends, she knows who she is. She will kill me if I sing because she thinks you can't sing. She thinks I should only sing for her. Anyway, I will say, it says, Tutotele Nkumbula Pamulandu Wachalo Nkumbula Achula Pamulandu Wachalo. I hope
beautiful.
she passes.
Beautiful.
Yeah. No, so the Nkoloma one was that when they moved to Richard Costen, Mr. Nkoloma had a vanette. The secretariat had a vanette. So this must have been maybe 1953.
Yeah.
And so as they were transporting goods, would jump on the vanette all the way, those who know Kitwe, from Usakile to Buchi.
It became a community bus.
And then after that, I don't know where he went, then we would have to walk back. But while we were riding, we were always singing, praising him. Because, you know, that Wankoloma Bat Papa or something, Twala Kosten or something like that.
Yes.
So basically, the trade union movement was the political movement and so on. Although the Congress itself, the formal formation of the Congress took place in Lusaka.
Yeah.
Somewhere where the Kabwata market is. If you go through all that mess, you'll find a brick house somewhere there. It was, they had one meeting there. The other meeting they had at what was called Munali, which is now somewhere where you have the David Kaunda Technical School.
Yes.
So that is where the Northern African Congress was founded. That's where my father was elected as president.
In Lusaka.
In Lusaka. I think I should also drop in that among the students at Munali, which was there, was Mr. Ruben Kamanga. So as a student, he went there and hung around, he didn't even have a seat. So he always said at least he witnessed
the foundation of the first place.
Of the leaders in the first Zambian government. The only other person who was there was Mr. Kapwepo, who came there as a delegate from the Kitwe African Society.
Okay.
So that when he was picked to go to India, it was all the people who were picked to go to India were active members of the Kitwe African Society before Congress was made, and even Mr. Nkumbula was an active member of the Kitwe African Society before he went to Makerere.
The evolution of Dr. Kaunda, when does he emerge?
Well, let's say this, because as you can tell from what I'm telling you, Kitwe was basically the center.
Yeah.
He had worked in Kitwe, also in the West, but I think it was for a very little while before he went to Mufurila. So while he was in Kitwe, he was not involved.
Okay.
In Mufurila, he was kind of involved, but not formally. His real involvement into Congress was after he returned to Chinsali. And by that time, his friends, the Sokoni and Makasa, were also back there.
Yeah.
And they had, the Makasas and Sokonis had already earlier formed a branch of the Federation of African Welfare Societies in Chinsali.
In Chinsali, okay.
When Kaunda went there, they decided, with the permission of the Congress headquarters, and I think President Kaunda in one of the books said he actually got a letter from the Secretary General permitting them to do that, to reconstitute it into a branch of the Congress.
Yeah.
The first chairman or president, in fact, I think they were called president, in Chinsali was Mr. Makasa. So that is the Mr. Kaunda's entry into politics. This was now in 1950.
Yeah.
After Congress, 2 years after Congress formation. Then after Mr. Nkumbula took over, he spotted him. And I think I've always said, I can't prove it, that I believe that the first and only real local person President Kaunda hero worshipped was Harry Nkumbula. And I think Harry Nkumbula liked it. So he's the one who brought him to Lusaka.
And made him Secretary General.
And he won. There was an election.
Oh, there was an election.
A person called Mr. Kalua, who was also our neighbor in Osakile, stood against him. But Mr. Kaunda then had the support of the president, so he won. But this was now in 1953. And what is significant in 1953 is that Mr. Nabulyato had earlier the same year left, I think acrimoniously, his office and went to Namwala. And the whole generation of founders of Congress, Badauti Yamba, left. They no longer held office. It was almost like a generational change. More or less the same thing that happened, that when Thabo Mbeki took over, suddenly the Susulus stepped aside. So he was left with people of his generation in the cabinet. So Nkumbula basically was left with younger people. He was almost of the generation of the earlier ones, but he was left with people who are younger than him. And then that's how the Kaunda now enters into politics.
Your father later becomes the Litunga way after the 50s. Which school were you at? Where are you in your station of life at the time? And what do you remember?
My father became a Litunga in 1968. By that time, I was in America. Just like 1948 was a very significant year for the reasons I've told you. 1968 for my generation, almost all over the world, was a very significant year. I was 20 years old. This is when Martin Luther King was assassinated. This is when Bobby Kennedy was assassinated. This is when Black American Olympians put their fists up at the Olympic in Mexico against racism. And so basically, and the fight...
Bob Kennedy was a brother to Robert
John
Kennedy. To John Kennedy, who had been killed as president in 1963. So he tried to run in 1968 and was killed during the campaign.
And
your young audience may not know those facts.
And the fight...
Of course, Martin Luther King, at least they identify.
So that, for instance, maybe they also might need to know that they would have heard that the Democratic Party in America has a lot of black support. It was not always that way. Until Kennedy ran for president in 1960, most black people were Republicans because Abe Lincoln was a Republican. And the conservatives, particularly in the South, tended to be the Democrats. But during the election campaign, Martin Luther King had been arrested. And John Kennedy, as a candidate, found him in jail. And this won the hearts of black people. And probably he won on account of this shift of votes from black people for him. So by the time his brother was running, long after he had been assassinated in 1968, he was seen to be progressive, anti-racism. And I was about to tell you that the other factor, 1968, was that the protests against the American war in Vietnam had really heightened on campuses, and I got very much involved in that.
Which university?
The Black Power movement.
Which university were you at?
I was then, very fortunately, at a black college called Jackson State University before I went to Cornell University in the north. And I think the week or so before Martin Luther King was killed, he came to Jackson State. And he was mobilizing people to go and give solidarity to the garbage collectors, what the American calls sanitary workers, in Memphis. And we were actually about to go and join that march. The very following morning of the night before we got the news that he had been shot, because Memphis is just the next state from Mississippi. So 68 got me involved, conscious of the Black Power movement, the anti-war movement in Vietnam, the Southern African liberation struggle. That's when I started now joining Southern African liberation support
For our
group.
liberation in Southern Africa, the lobby was more heightened already. Did you hear it about it here, or you got it in the US at the campus?
I think I got more of it in America, because that's when I was active. After 68, I was 20. So this was my awakening. I say I was born, politically, I was born in 1968. All the things that you know about Aka, what he believes in,
the foundation
the foundation was in 1968. Later on, when I went to postgraduate study in Cornell, I became president of the African Students Association, became vice president of the Pan-African Students Association in the Americas. We used to argue with Hage, the prime minister, the late president of Namibia.
Of Namibia, yes, we were together at
He
school.
also joined, but we never were at the same meetings. And the Pan-African PASOA is called, the Pan-African Students Association of the Americas, was started in the 1930s. The first president was Nkrumah.
Wow, coming Nkrumah.
Yeah, so my Pan-Africanism has roots like those.
Yes.
From Nkrumah, Azikiwe, in the first president of Nigeria, were all members of that association.
Yes.
Then I also became very active in the Southern African Liberation Support Committee. We are raising funds. We are inviting political leaders, freedom fighters, and I met Cabral, I met Neto. This is where I befriended all my Namibian colleagues even before they came here. In fact, the first job I wanted when I came here was to join the SWAPO.
Wow, wow. Boaka, you were now telling me you are in the US, you are doing, I think, your university education, and now you've been interested, particularly in these social and political causes in the world related to black movement, issues of Southern Africa liberation, and you said you wanted to join SWAPO upon return.
Yes, let me say that when I was in undergraduate at Jackson State in Mississippi, I was there, I had a tuition scholarship. But for livelihood, I needed other sources. And my entire pension, the entire pension my father had for 21 years of working in Kitwe was £20. And it all went to me. It paid for, and for the first term, I went in the dorm. from September. By November, the British devalued the pound. And it was obvious that I couldn't pay to stay in the dorm in January.
Yeah.
So I learned the meaning of devaluation before I'd entered an economics class.
Because the value of your money immediately was
Yes,
reduced.
so I had to move off campus, and for about 18 months, I was living. I couldn't buy clothing, I couldn't date, there's nothing. So I spent my time with Alice Walker, the famous writer of The Color Purple. She became my friend, my teacher, and my revolutionary teacher. So I say that she's the most radical person I've ever met. Quiet, gentle, radical. And she, I think, introduced me to black literature, revolutionary literature in America and the world, actually. So, but after a year and a half, I got a scholarship from the Bursaries Committee in Zambia of $360. Okay. By that time, my monthly income from my father's pension had been reduced to $36. So for the first time, I was able to move into a proper flat, held my first party, and so on and so forth. And when I graduated, I was given UNZA's scholarship, staff development scholarship. That's how I went to Cornell University.
Okay.
From a historically black college to a historically white college, an Ivy League college in New York called Cornell. It is while there that now I became really involved in these issues. And that's where I started being the president of the African Association and so on, as I've said. And using that platform would invite freedom fighters. Now, I should say that my very last month as an undergraduate at Jackson State, there was an instance, a famous instance, where the National Guard came and killed 2 of our students.
While you were in a protest or something?
We were protesting against the war in Vietnam. We were supporting the students in Kent University in Ohio somewhere who had also been killed by the police at a protest against the war in Vietnam. So there was all havoc. This was like 2 weeks before graduation.
Yeah.
And I was put in a delegation of 2 from the university to go, because we were being invited all over the United States to speak about this instance. So I was one of the delegation of 2 sent to New York. That's where I first met Haggai. He was then he was then the representative of SWAPO. Having been gone to the university, Fordham University in New York, which is the one that gave President Kaunda his first honorary degree, by the way. So it is very supportive of our liberation struggle. So I met him there in Harlem. We met Powell, all the big black leaders. We talked to them. We talked to churches and addressed this issue. We were on radio programs. So that was my first introduction to him. Later on, when VJ was at the UN, each time I would go to New York. By that time, my sister and her husband, Mr. Nyirenda, was the deputy to VJ. So the freedom fighters were in and out of Zambian diplomatic homes.
We were like the host because
we were the
Dr.
host,
Kaunda's
yes,
role.
And so I became very familiar with exile, South African exile, particularly SWAPO. So when I was president of the African Students Association, I remember inviting Peter Kajavivi, who was then secretary of SWAPO, to talk, and we invited many other people. Then after Cornell, I went to Carleton University in Canada. It's another long story how I ended up there, which got me into trouble with UNZA. They refused.
Oh, because after the staff development, they expected you to come back.
Yes. So I went to Carleton, continued. Then I invited Peter Gajavivi. This time he came with the vice president of SWAPO then, Muyongo. I know you know the story. Later on, they parted company, but Mr. Muyongo basically is also my relative anyway. So I became close to SWAPO in that way. So when I came back after Canada, I really wanted to join SWAPO. And then on the ground, it became obvious that you don't just land in Lusaka and they give you a machine gun and tell you the border to Namibia or something and start shooting. So I started looking for work. And it's very adventurous. Ultimately, I got work at Indeco. And ironically, when now I became full-time in the campaign against one-party state, both myself and Mbita Chitala, we were given by Hage part-time jobs to teach at the Namibia Institute. So the year when we had resigned from our jobs, we are now full-time on MMD, part-time teaching classes at the Namibia Institute. That is how basically we went into the 1991 issues.
1990, 1991 is a great epoch for our country because you trace from 1964 we're a multi-party democracy. By 1968, Dr. Kaunda feels is losing grip. By 1973, he's introduced a one-party state, which period became an oppressive period, some form of dark period in our country. Various people have various views about it. But by 1990, there are these agitations for us to return to multi-party state. This is where the history of our country really, truly records you as being at the forefront. Speak to that.
Yes.
How did you get to the agitation? How did you feel you could mobilize this first meeting? How come you're not afraid of the one-party state? Because it truly was a difficult, oppressive regime.
Well, let's say that it did not, for me, I trace it back to 1983.
Okay.
Because, in fact, 1981. Because in 1981, when I was working with the National Commission for Development Planning, almost as a volunteer actually. I would go there, participate in the planning, third development plan and the fourth development plan, which didn't finish. And I got to be very close with Dr. Chivuno and some of the people. So some of the people we were working with were Swedes. So they offered me a scholarship to do my PhD anywhere I wanted.
Yes.
And I was accepted by Boston University. And when I went there, Indico leadership was not happy with me, so they put me on unpaid leave.
Oh, because you had organized this scholarship outside.
Yes.
In
fact, it was a very funny process because when I told Dr. Chivuno that my bosses don't want me to go, he said it's too embarrassing. Yeah. You have to get them to write a letter. So I went to my MD to say, they want a letter from you. So they said, fine, you draft it. So I drafted a letter, which included that I couldn't go that year because I'm working on NCZ project, which is what I was working on. And, but can they reserve it for the following year? Since all they wanted was to stop me, they signed it. When the year came, 81, that is the time when Zimbabwe was getting its independence, which again I was very involved in. I produced a book of poetry which was going to be launched in Zimbabwe. with the Minister of Constitutional Affairs, Ed Zobo, as guest of honor. But this is the time I was supposed to fly out to Boston. And Indico wasn't giving me permission. They dilly-dallied. I ended up going. And then they wrote me that I'd absconded. And because I'd absconded, they won't put me on paid leave. So I couldn't finish my PhD. People think I've been busy collecting master's degrees. Yeah. All of them have stories where I didn't proceed. So this one, I had to come back after my third master's degree.
Yes.
When I came back, they were still annoyed with me.
Yes.
But
you say something very fundamental, that you are involved in the NCZ project. This is the largest, one of the largest, I think, industry we've ever had outside the mining sector. And I'm told you, the experts, had recommended, especially for raw materials, that it could be best. Is it in Isoka or where? Just briefly speak to that.
Well, basically, it is also related to the UDI in Zimbabwe, that the mines are dependent on coal from Hwange.
Yeah.
And with the closure of the borders, the threats of closure even before that, it became imperative to look for a coal mine on the other side of the river, and Mwamba was identified. Having politically decided to have a coal mine, in order for that coal mine to be economic, it was not sufficient to supply the mines. So we were looking for any other thing which can take products from there. So now, the decision of what technology to use for fertilizer was politically decided that it should be one that uses coal.
Yeah.
And this is where now the problems begin.
Yes.
Then also supposed to provide some product, Kafilonda, for dynamite, blah, blah, blah. Okay? So that was the theory. But now, if you are going to use a coal-based technology, it means it needed phosphate. Okay. Now, everybody knew that we had some phosphate along Petauke, that area. But up to date, we haven't exploited it. So the economics of a coal-based fertilizer plant depends on the economics of procuring a phosphate. If we didn't provide it from our own resources, then we had to import a compost, more or less a pre-made fertilizer bag, so that physically the same weight of what we imported is what came out. The only thing we got from coal was basically, shall I call it simplistically, the vapor to mix with this thing. And it could never be viable. Worse than that, the first part of NCZ was built by the Japanese as a unit. The expansion was built by about 3 different, a German company, a French company, maybe 2 German companies, I forget. So that basically the NCZ plant is like 5 factories in one, producing
different technologies, yes.
Yeah, and also just feeding into each other. So plus this basic lack of phosphate, then this mixture. Then by the time we were finishing, the economy was collapsing. Sometimes I feel Zambians do not appreciate that the Zambian economy collapsed in 1973.
Wow.
From 1973 until the early 90s, we were in regression, straightforward regression, except for 1 year, 1988, when we broke away from the IMF and the World Bank. That is the only year the Zambian economy grew. And
you mean, now that's fundamental work, that's very fundamental. The year we broke away from the IMF and World Bank, we actually registered a positive growth in our economy.
Yes.
Why? What would you attribute that to?
One, it was also almost mechanical, because now we were allocating foreign exchange directly. That I want 20 cars, how much foreign? Okay, maybe produce 5 of them. We'll give you the forex you need. So that there was even a program called FEMAC at the World Bank, at the Bank of Zambia, for precisely allocating foreign exchange. So the key industries were guaranteed and given the forex they needed to produce. Of course, it means that the other part of the industries have nothing. But those that had produced enough to tip us into growth for that 1 year. And unfortunately, the pressures of the world, one, we declared that in breaking out from the IMF and World Bank, that we are not going to pay our debt.
Yeah.
The truth is that we were not paying anyway.
I see.
Okay, we are not paying anyway, and we had no arrangement.
And could
we had no arrangement.
Could the world allow us to renegade on our debt?
No, because
become truant, belligerent against our own debt.
Would have been a bad example. And this is at the time when the imperialists had created the Paris Club, where all of them, as a collective, meet in Paris and call us one by one. We didn't go there as Africa. We
were isolated and separated.
So, I mean, there was even a very funny instance when Penza was minister, that the Zambian delegation to the Paris Club had forgotten its documents. When they reached Paris, they didn't have the documents. And the copies were produced by the French ambassador to Lusaka.
To fax them for us.
so that basically there were those pressures. And but I personally, now we will link up with the MMD stat.
Yes.
I personally was so disappointed with President Kaunda and the Zambian government for surrendering.
Yes.
Because I was looking at this figure.
Yeah.
This is when I volunteered to run a TV program for 13 weeks. It ended up being 15 weeks.
What was the purpose of the program, the public program?
To support the idea of breaking away from the IMF and the World Bank.
That we can run our
that
own
we
economy.
can develop, because the slogan is that we can develop from our own resources. So basically, ideologically, that really fitted into my mood. So when the surrender came, and I remember very well, it was December 1988.
Yeah. When President Kaunda announced that we return back to the IMF.
They didn't even announce, we just started seeing that we have surrendered.
Was that a spark
that
introduction
was one of the sparks. This is why my book called Milk in the Basket, I think you have a copy of this, the latter version, which we call The Political Economy of Zambia. That's the one which I called Milk in the Basket.
Yes.
And
because milk in the basket, you can't return milk in the basket.
Yes. So that I became very disappointed. At the same time, I also became disappointed with what we were doing in Indico. I was group director of projects.
Yeah.
So some of the projects we built were the Mansa batteries, the Chipata factory, bicycles,
plant, yes,
and maize mills and all sorts of things. Now, these were directed on the philosophy of import substitution, which, by the way, was our original recommended strategy at independence. Before independence, the World Bank got Professor Sears from Oxford He's the one who supervised our interim development plan, our first development plan of Zambia, based on this import substitution. Now, the logic of import substitution is linked up to another pressure we were getting from the West, that we shouldn't go into heavy industry. We should just add value, middle stuff. There was a big economic arguments all over the world, which was ideological. Because the Russians, the Chinese, started with their development plan, not only with small scale, they started with heavy industry, small scale, all this.
They combined.
But we were being advised to take baby steps first, with no program to graduate from being babies. Okay? So, even in the 1970s, when Indico was nationalized, became a national entity, it came from nationalization. But most of the industries in Indico became the ones we built ourselves, based on this import substitution model. Which was earlier recommended by the World Bank, but which is fundamentally faulty, because you set up a factory, a battery factory. Instead of importing a pre-made factory, you import maybe 10 little bits of it, and then come and assemble it. Now,
it was basically just assembly processes.
So that the foreign exchange required to get it in pieces was not different from the one, was worse than the ones
required for importation.
Now, one of the issues, very funny instance happened when we were now commissioning, and I was now in charge of Mansa batteries. First, we ordered the machinery. It got bogged.
From Finland, is it?
From Finland. It got bogged down at the port in Lobito. At that time, the Banguela Railway was still operating. But later on, UNITA, with the assistance of the Americans, sabotaged it. Today, Biden is about to come to invest in the Lobito,
which they had helped destroy.
That's another story. So then we had to order another one, but it was insured. So the insurance people did a trick on us. Instead of bringing a new plant from Finland, they brought a plant that had been sent to the Middle East. So when it landed, we fixed it, everything was installed, and the Finnish Prime Minister came at the opening. He was accompanied by Mainza Chona. And a very fun instance. I stayed in Mansa for a week, trial runs, everything was working. When the Prime Minister pressed the switch, nothing moved.
What happened?
So now we had to investigate what happened. That's when the Finns themselves found out that we had been given, this is not machinery we had ordered.
I see.
So the Prime Minister ordered that they supply us a proper one, which they did. So finally we had to redo it. Now, one of the things we learned, I learned, which disturbed me most, is to discover that all the justification we are talking for why we should have Mansa batteries were not right. One, we thought we were taking development to rural areas. But when we looked at the people we employed, all of them are the ones we got from Lusaka and the Copper Bells, except for 4. 3 of those 4 were security guards. So it is not true that we took employment.
Jobs. Because the understanding was that by locating these industries,
there will be employment in the area. So that didn't work. And then we took manganese, at that time, it was not a commodity like now. So we go to a few hills, get our manganese. We paid nobody. A few lorries satisfied with all the manganese we needed. So there was no benefit locally from manganese suppliers.
Yeah, yeah.
Then the whole economics of it. Then I really looked at my bicycle plant in Chipata, which was a little better economically, because the worst thing about the batteries is that although most of us, apart from people like me, most of us are just first-generation villagers.
Yeah.
But even first-generation villagers, the minute they've been in town, they forget how people live in the village.
Yeah.
So we were acting as if people in the village would be using torches to stay up at night up to 10 p.m. or whatever, watching TV, whatever, the way we live.
Yeah.
But the natives long discovered that with dry cell batteries, their greatest use is for radios.
Yeah.
And if you put them in the sun, they regenerate. So you don't have to keep buying batteries.
Yes, yes.
So there was no market. Okay.
Well, that's why our parents would put the batteries outside
Yes,
the window
they had
sills.
figured out that.
Yeah.
So now Chipata was a little better because there was a market for bicycles in Chipata. But the question of importing one bicycle is cheaper than importing it in 10 pieces.
And then assembling it and then creating this infrastructure.
Then I began examining our whole economic strategy, including this issue which had annoyed me very much, of depending on the IMF and the World Bank.
Yeah.
The loans, which are basically endless. I mean, they are designed, there's no plan that you borrow and then after a time you graduate into debtlessness. It's nothing like that. So we are basically in a trap. And we've been in a trap for a very long time, since 73, up to date. So that also disturbed me a lot. Then there's the issue of Forex.
Yeah. The critical shortage of forex.
In other words, what made us artificially look like we had grown in 88 was just manipulation of how you allocate Forex. Didn't mean we had more dollars or and we had actually developed just on paper. Now, this question of exchange rates.
Yeah.
Like you have an election. If you elect a Ramaphosa, the whites are happy, so your rand goes better. If you elect
a radical,
they are puppet. But they'll still go back to their normal exploitative relationship. They may celebrate a little bit, but nothing has changed.
Yeah.
So that when we are talking about, in the Zambian case, that if you devalue the kwacha, then your export goes up. In our particular case, it doesn't work that way because the same people who buy the copper are determining, we are not determining the price of our copper. Our copper price is determined elsewhere.
Yeah.
So it's not ours. But at the same time, these economic policies within our country, there are winners and losers. Yeah. There are those who get enriched by these policies and those who get impoverished. Now, my thinking was that if the people genuinely had power over their government, even how much to devalue, what to devalue, what economic policies will be driven by our people's interests. Yeah. This is the same type of thinking our parents had, why there was a slogan, one man, one vote.
Yeah.
We assumed that our only problem is that we have no influence on government. If we have the vote,
will influence that government.
Then the policy, whoever rules us will have to follow us. But just like with the vote, the same with the economy. Our people, do they vote according to their economic interests? They don't. You can go to Sakile and campaign in the interest of mine workers. They may vote for whichever guy has bribed them. They vote for their relative. They vote for the one who has said you are the one going to replace Emmanuel in Addis Ababa, rather than your interest as a mine worker.
PLO Lumumba sums it very well from Kenya, your dear brother.
Yes.
He says, he tried to participate. He says, let me make the changes practical. So he participated in an election. He propounded what was good for the community, how the community can come better. And his opponent didn't even bother to come to that area until the last day, came with a bag of money and took the election.
And took the election, yes. Yes, yes. I mean, even our election, in other words, the value our parents thought we will give to the vote, we have not given it. Yeah. It's not that they disempowered us. We still have that power. But are we using it in our interests or not? And you find that we are using it in our interests, yes, but personal interests, short-term interests, not social interests, not long-term interests, not interests that ultimately solve our problems in the long run to create a problemless situation, but problem that just feed us for today. So that is the choice.
So let me take you to 1990. You've identified, you've participated. First, you've been fully, properly educated. You come back, you try to participate and contribute from the wealth of knowledge that you've gained. And you see all these challenges and difficulties in the structure of our economy, even the type of our democracy. And at the time, I think, the issue of oppression. And I'm glad that you participated in the running of our country. Right at the apex, you became a director in Indeco, and you were directing these investment in industries across our country. So then how do you move to decide that probably we need to change the model from one-party state to multi-party state? And whose idea was it? I know that, for example, ZCTU under Frederick Chiluba in '89 had voted as one of their Congress resolution that the country must go to multi-party state. Earlier, I think there were MPs that had spoken about, is it Joshua Lumina and others that had spoken about the need to go to multi-party democracy. But I think history records you and Bita Chitala as the one that really formalized those thoughts and called for a conference.
Yeah, I think the issue, and this is a very pertinent thing we have to grasp, that it is easier to know what the problem is. And it's not very difficult to know what the solution is. What to do about it, and when to do, but who should do about it. Many times we linger at a point where we know the solution, but then
how do we get there?
Finger pointing. You see, that one has stolen, that one has not passed the ball to the right person. We are comfortable being spectators. And when we go into the field again, we start playing like those people we are criticizing. And I think this is one of the thing that is troubling me most. Our selectiveness in fault finding, our not looking into the mirror to say what is actually wrong with us ourselves first. What can we ourselves do? In other words, if it's not done by me, who will do it? If it's not done now, when is the right time? And it revolves around the issue of determining whether in your action, your personal and narrow interest takes precedence over the social and broader interests that you know are the things that you should be concerned, that you make a decision that yes, I should do this, but for now, let me eat.
So everyone was talking about it, was whispering, but
Yes.
you took the step.
Yes. Now, part of, yes, I think I'd mentioned that maybe it was off camera, that one of the reasons we seemed to have succeeded was that the system did not factor in our naivety. They were looking for well thought of sabotage plan that we had been sponsored, or whoever can overthrow this government must be a saboteur, must be sponsored, and then that wasn't the case.
Or must linger around issues of a coup.
Yes. I mean, when I met, and I was with Mbita, when we met, now the decisive meeting we had with Mr. Chiluvaini's office in Ndola, and I'd been trying to meet him for many years before that.
Yeah.
Because the minute, by the way, I was punished when I came back from school, from Boston, by being sent to a company that didn't exist, Zambia Ceramics. Having been this group director of projects of the Industrial Development Corporation.
They give you CEO of a company, which is an idea.
They said, okay, you can be called general manager, but basically it was a project. What did they not carry? That's my hometown. So I was very happy to be there. I felt at home. I was able to be even president of the press club. I was at the theater club. I was in the Chamber of Commerce. So I was able to...
Your activism always rises.
And then I started working with the cooperative union, the trade union, small-scale industrialists as a resource person. Mm-hmm. And the union, how I got to the union was that, by the way, I'm a socialist. I'm just looking for a socialist country to live in. But personally, I'm a socialist.
Yeah.
So, because it's a new company, you have to write a new agreement with the union. Mm. So I worked with them. And I was so cooperative. I mean, I put in the collective agreement things they did not even expect.
Anticipate.
So I was supposed to be the enemy on the other side, became their colleague. So they started inviting me to their workshops and all over the world. Meanwhile, I had come armed with this book, Milk in the Basket. Yeah. This book was my dissertation at Boston University.
Okay.
I was trying to figure out why these Mansabatis were not developing. Factor. And I had concluded that naively, as it turned out, that the real reason is that our system is dictatorial and it's top-down. If our people were really empowered and knowledgeable, they would be able, by that time, even us radicals were a little bit disappointed with what was happening to the Eastern Europe and so on. So we were not very confident whether we were right. But we felt this capitalism also is too extreme. Yeah. So we thought there would be need for moderation. But this moderation must be determined case by case, pragmatically, with the people in the driving seat. Yeah. So that was basically the idea. So when I was going to these cooperative unions, small-scale trade unions, that was my message. Then when I left ceramics, I joined Blackwood Hodge in Lusaka. Then I became chairman of the Economics, because in one party state you couldn't be president of the Economic Association or the.
There was only one president.
It's like it's like under the colonial system they only had to have one king in the world. So the rest of them were paramount chiefs or something. So then I was there for 3 years. And turned the economic club into a forum in which all thinking people felt free to come and
express
themselves.
Safe enough.
It's not like now where clubs or associations like that, to have a meeting, they need to write letters to donors. We didn't do things like that. We went to a hotel to say, please give us a room, open a cash bar. Those who are coming will be buying your beers. That's all. There were no per diems, there's nobody. Whoever came to speak was lucky to be invited to speak. Not to speak and then be given some money and so. So it was quite a cheap thing, but very effective forum. So within that process, you start identifying people. But I must admit with hindsight that the identification was totally superficial. And the organization to some level was quite, the mobilization was superficial, and the time was squeezed. So there wasn't time to really know each other very much. But the idea that there had to be a change, to surprisingly, the people captured it immediately. I mean, you are saying maybe we started MMD, but sometimes when I think back, because wherever we went, people are just waiting to see us. Otherwise, our ideas and their ideas were one. And they organized themselves. We were just the pieces being used for them. And so that's how we succeeded. But at the same time, the major weakness is that I assumed automatically that if you are against one-party state, my list of what is wrong with one-party state, which is in my head, is also in your head. Which was a major mistake, because people had quarrels with one-party states of all sorts. Sometimes like even
over time,
like I was in fact, my quarrel with UNIP is that I was more UNIP than UNIP at the time.
And you didn't like
I
what
wanted a
become.
UNIP that to break away from the IMF and the World Bank. So I was disappointed that this UNIP, which is supposed to be a revolutionary party, is now running a neo-colonial economy, is handing over the destiny of our country to the IMF.
Foreigners,
So, whereas others actually thought UNIP was socialist, too socialist. They were looking for it to be capitalist. And we kind of put a plaster over this wound as we moved in solidarity.
Or the ideological struggle of UNIP.
Yes. In other words, for instance, the original program of MMD, we ourselves knew that it was a social democratic, by European terminology, it's a social democratic thing. And we are looking for a social market economy. And we had put that in the original plan. Then I remember some of our capitalist friends whom we thought were our allies. Immediately, why are you saying social market economy? Why don't you just say market economy? So we argued and argued. Then we thought we had won by saying, okay, we'll take out social, but the rest of the program
will be the same.
But once we got into power, there were two things. One, there's the constitutional aspect. That the MMD constitution was super democratic. No individual had any power. The president could not decide anything on his own. You either decide as an NEC, you decide as a convention, and so on. But he goes to State House with two constitutions. Our constitution, which gives him zero power, and the UNIP constitution, which gives him all the same powers Kaunda had, except for allowing multi-parties. So he chooses. On the economy, it's the same. We have this social democratic program. Once we are in government, we find that the government, even before individuals from our team were in it, was already in dialogue with IMF.
Wow.
We sometimes fool ourselves that MMD introduced this liberalization. It's not true. The liberalization was a program running
by the IMF.
From
fact,
1988
Dr. Kaunda quoted several times.
to 93.
Yes.
It was supposed to run to 93.
Yes.
So
yes.
in 1991, we take it over. The only difference that UNIP having this image as revolutionary, we are too embarrassed. Then we come into power, and it
was easier to implement.
We are so happy to be promoting free markets.
Yeah, yeah. But you,
so that
you
now,
can excuse at times, Honorable Aka, because socialism now has a bad name. You know, the Soviet Union has
during
collapsed.
That.
And this is 1991, and the winds of change are pushing more to liberal politics and freedoms. So I think it was an excuse, and it was a perfect time for the IMF to really push this agenda.
No, it was perfect. Even us, I think I said earlier that even us, we had lost confidence in what we believed in.
Correct.
We had not changed what we believed in, but we are now not driving. This is why we are talking about social market economy. Basically, we didn't want a free market economy.
Yes, yes.
But we didn't have, the mood of the world was not like that.
Yeah.
It was a decade later, having given it our best shot to have these free markets, to have these IMF get everything they want, then at the end of the day, you discover that nationalization and privatization, there's no difference. The winners, after we nationalized, we gave the management contract to Anglo-American.
Yeah, correct.
When we privatized, we gave the mines to Anglo-American.
Yes.
The system of copper mining, copper marketing,
the structure of ownership,
the structure was the same capitalist structure. So that we began to gain some confidence. Like now, I'm so confident. I wish I was just a little bit, even 5-10 years younger.
Yes.
I'm ready for revolution.
better
armed with experience.
Yeah.
I know the cost of compromise. For instance, with this, I said that we only changed one clause in the Constitution to allow for multiple. But we believe that after we are in government, we'll change the rest of the Constitution, which we have never done.
Yeah.
All the changes we have made to the Zambian Constitution from independence are regressive. They are in the wrong direction. They are personal, they are partisan, they are short-term, they are focused on the next election. Except perhaps the reverse we made to change Article 4 and introduce multi-part. Otherwise, all the constitutional changes we have made are in the wrong direction. All the economic changes we have made have failed to go in the right direction.
Yeah.
Up to date. So that really the situation with our experience now, we've tried both extremes.
Yeah.
We should have enough knowledge now.
We went to the left, far left with Dr. Kaunda.
Yes.
We went to the right, far right with Dr.
So that
Chilumba
now,
and probably President Hichilema.
My challenge to this generation, the younger generation, is to become revolutionary now. Otherwise, if you are going to have...
When you use words like, we have to be revolutionary, what does that mean? It scares the leaders, it scares the state. What does that mean? Just break it down. Well,
basically, it's to really decolonize. You see, because we have to go back to the basics.
Yeah.
What was the mission? We were talking about our fathers and the earlier generation. What were they fighting against? Why were they fighting? They were fighting colonialism. And what is colonialism? Colonialism is to take power from our indigenous institution, our African institution, over land and natural resources, is to take away the power to govern ourselves from our indigenous government structures, our African structure, or Africanist structures. So that is the basic thing. And this is not what we got as independence, didn't do that. Was not designed to do that. And up to now, we haven't done that. But of course, we must understand that when we say give back these powers to indigenous Africanists, we must understand that, well, they did have this power. Why did they lose it? So we have, again, in addition, we don't change our goal that we must have this power.
Yeah.
But we are saying, what else do we need to do to reinforce ourselves so that next round we will not be so easily disempowered? So those are the things we should be discussing now.
We have the last 60 years. Like we have learned what Dr. Kaunda did, what Dr. Chiluba did, Levi Mwanawasa, President Rupia Banda, Michael Sataid Galungu, and President Hakainde Hichilema is now taking us into the next 60 years. What have we done wrong, which we could do better? How can Singapore, Vietnam, South Korea, even China, who were far literally more wealthy and far richer than them, now they have leapt into the first world, while we are stagnant as among the 20 poorest countries in the world.
There are many. There are two things you have said. I think there are two different answers.
Yeah.
This example of the Singapores, I'm sure you've read From Third to First World.
Yes.
By Lee Kuan Yew.
Yes.
When I read it, I thought, wow, this is what we
the founding prime minister of Singapore.
This is what we should do. I reread it the second time. Halfway through, I realized that we can't do it. Because if you produced a Lee Kuan Yew, he will not be elected in Zambia. Because he's not going to bribe you.
Correct.
Okay? So that there's something within us that we have to decide, what do we really want? Is it true we want to be like Singapore? Or we are just tulekumbwafi? But if we are given that, oh no, the way this guy got there. The same with Malaysia. Matia is the generation of the Kaunda. I think he was even born in 1924 also.
Yes.
So in 1969, there was race riots in Malaysia. The indigenous Malay, who at that time were quite a larger number than now, were fighting Indians and Chinese. And they came up with a system which is even more serious than our tribal balancing, because our tribal balancing disregards marriage. Okay, theirs, they decided that no, politically, this country, forget numbers, forget education, forget everything, belongs to indigenous Malay. Yes, we welcome the Chinese, we welcome them, they are citizens, but when it comes to power, we'll share power with them, but in a balancing act where ultimately the Malays are the dominant ones. Okay? And it worked quite well, and it's just the last few years that it's crumbling, over these years. So they formed this super party, an alliance. Now, the difference between that alliance, the alliances we're talking about, is that This is an alliance of known entities. More or less like the Kenyan, who are good tribalists, better tribalists than us. That if you get Raila, you know what you are getting. If you get Mwamba, you don't know what you are getting, because I'm not sure all members will follow you.
Yeah, correct.
Okay? You may come to Lusaka Mbemba, you know, like one Chitimkulu told me. That's a different thing.
Yeah.
So the alliances in Malay are known, and those representing groups are truly representative of those
They have
groups.
legitimacy.
So when you make a deal, it works. As I say, even that crumbles a bit. Now, what Matia did in '69 was take note. The courage to say, our people are aggrieved, and it's racial. But he asked the question, why are Malays more stupid than Chinese? Why are they weaker than the Indians? And he went through all the psychological thing, all the socialization. And to simplify his argument, there's a book called The Malay Dilemma. It's a very small book, but in other words, he was kicked out of the party, by the way. So during the period he was out of the party, he did this study. And he concluded that, see, one, by definition, a Malay is a Muslim. They are thinking about the world after death.
Yeah.
Two, they tend to live on the plains, like the Barossa plain areas.
Yeah.
They grow rice. The rice they need for the whole year requires 3 months' work. The rest of it, so they can work for 3 months and sit
And rest
back,
for 7
eat.
months.
They are not interested in so many worldly things because they are waiting to go to this paradise after they are dead. The other aspect is that, you see, they are very proud of being indigenous. In other words, even if you come with your Benz, he still feels superior to you because you are not indigenous. Yeah. But when he now looked, what are the advantages the Indians and the Chinese have? Entrepreneurship, education. Then he discovers that the same conclusion in the Singapore example, the same conclusion that Lee Kuan Yew discovered, because he was worried, although he's Chinese and they are majority, he was concerned about this minority, Malay, who had the same characteristics as the Malay in Malaysia. So they both decided to have focus on education. That the Malay students are scared of math, they are scared of science. So they started forcing schools to give extra science math class to Malay students. Secondly, what do they call it? This, like in job allocation, they made sure that in job allocation, school allocation, and so on, the Malays are put there.
The apprenticeship opportunities that arise.
Yes. In other words, by the time he came back, which was, I think, 74, and for the next 20 years, he was implementing a well-thought-out plan. He had figured out the problem deeply and the solutions. He had the guts to tell his people that here you are second class, and if you are going to be first class, this is what you have to do.
Yeah.
And over the years, in the 20 years, up to 2004, his program basically, the Malay are no longer second class, whether in science, in engineering, or in anything.
The cure was education.
We also have the same examples with our Afrikaner brothers in South Africa. We think we defeated apartheid.
Yeah.
By the time the apartheid, it had fulfilled this program. Because in 1948, Afrikaners were second-class whites. If you went to the university and looked for chancellors, they were British. If you went to the bank, they were British.
Yeah.
If you went to the petrol organization, they were British. So they were second-class whites. So, and they spent maybe 50 years studying their problem and organizing the solution. When the minute they won the election, they got down to the job. I mean, we don't like their legislation. But in terms of uplifting Afrikaners, now it's very difficult to find a British South African white. The whole university, the top guys are Afrikaners, the banks, all these banks which are here are Afrikaner banks.
Correct.
And they were deliberately set up in competition against Barclays Bank, against Standard Chartered Bank. Because although Standard Chartered was started by Afrikaners, these were the Afrikaners who had been Anglicized. So, again, they had a deliberate policy. When they join a school committee, they are not just going to talk about uniforms, blah, blah, blah. They are talking about, if you don't have an Afrikaner headmaster, what qualification does he need next time to be there? So this detailed programming is the challenge that we have. We cannot become a Singapore without the sacrifice, the focus that they had.
What is wrong? Apparently, we seem just to copy. We've had national development plans. Some you participated in them. The ones in the 70s, you found them inadequate. Then during multi-party state, like we're saying, the socialist market and planning.
We even abandoned.
We abandoned for 20 years. There were no.
You see, what happened, as I said, that these imperialists, they are long-term runners.
Yeah.
And they have layers of leadership. You have your ordinary white racists you bump in a bar, it calls you a kefir or something. This system doesn't run on those. Those are just riffraffs. Oppenheimer doesn't care whether you share a toilet with him. The white person who cares is normally just trash. So the system is being run. So in the case of Zambia, since we are talking about independence,
yeah,
that you see, the conservatives like Churchill, the system of Britain rejected him in 1944. You can imagine these big heroes, he has won the war,
yeah,
speaks so well on radio. But when they went to vote, immediately after the war, they voted him out of office.
Why is that? This is a hero. This is the one that has emancipated Britain. But at the next election...
That is the other problem that you see. Does it mean that if, like me, that, okay, I work hard, I remove the one-party state, does that qualify me to run a government after the one-party state? There must be something more than that. Okay? So, even when Churchill...
Did you, just on that question, you've raised the matter, did you feel disappointed that all your sweat, all your hard work, all your thought processes, there appear to have been a shift with these new people you had invited, and just the economic order of the world? Like you are saying, there was an IMF program on the run. It didn't matter which government.
And we thought, I thought it would be rejected.
Yeah.
Okay, like we recruited these, they are not even real capitalists. I think Fanon knows them. They are
Franz Fanon, the book and the hero
the
from
wretched of the earth.
Yes.
He says, you see, the bourgeoisie of ours are not the real bourgeoisie. They own nothing. They are just dealers in the middle. Okay? They are parasites. They don't produce anything. So, but we had a class of Zambians who were, as I said, when I was in Kitwe, I was able to be in the Chamber of Commerce. So I got involved. That's how the VJ, ABC, Chikwanda, I got involved with them. Of course, VJ had known him earlier, even Chikwanda, I've known him earlier. But the Chikwandas, VJs, Kashita, I personally wanted them to join us from the Chamber of Commerce because we thought the problem, as I say, was foreign exchange. Now, all the real Zambian businessmen understood that the theory that if you devalue, we benefit doesn't work with us. So I thought, yes, they are capitalists, but at least they are nationalist capitalists. They know that devaluation is not in our national interest. So I was shocked when we went into cabinet. A few weeks, 3-4 meetings later, Mr. Kasonde starts informing the cabinet that we are devaluing. I said, what? Then we are arguing because we had been talking about this and we had our program. Which was
and you thought the issue of devaluation of the currency must have been left behind with UNIP?
Yes. So, then he didn't even have good arguments to defend himself. So he turns to the poor president. Mr. President, as you know, he mentioned the date, like reminding you remember those people we met that we agreed. And then the president didn't give us an argument. He just confirmed that there was already a meeting and an agreement had already been made. A commitment had already been made. The purpose of the Minister of Finance's statement to Cabinet was just for information.
And ratification.
So slowly you start saying, now, even in their own business, this is not in their interest. Almost the same thing I'm saying about a miner.
Yeah.
That he may not vote according to his real interest as a miner, as a mining worker. He has other consideration. In other words, they are getting other things outside their normal income-generating activities that they work at. So they do not even if they used to have a shop, the minute they are in cabinet, they are no longer representing shop owners. It's the same even with gender. Because with the coming of MMD government, this gender issue, like all these, I mean, people now think that they don't know that before 1991, the NGOs were the Boy Scout movement, the Girl Guide movement, the YWCA, and they talked about knitting and the Bible and stuff like that. They didn't talk about elections. So that when we came in power, then the women's lobby was sponsored by the Americans. And it was quite vocal, and the government, at least Mr. Chiluba and the cabinet, were not happy with them. Then you found that even ladies, women, militants who had joined us on the basis that they were militants for gender, militants in every way, as long as they were in that cabinet, as long as they were deputy ministers, they could not attend women's lobby meetings.
Yeah.
So that saying we have so many women does not mean that women are represented. Real women interests, because the representatives that have come forward have acquired new interests, which don't necessarily. The same with this ethnicity. That
in fact,
you could say that, oh, no, the Minister of Finance is lousy, blah, blah, blah. There is no chance in hell that he represents the interests of Barroso people. There's no chance in hell. The greatest chance is that he represents his appointing authority, the one who can fire him. Unless you are an Aka who's prepared to resign, and there are not too many. There are not too many.
What caused your resignation and the resignation of your colleagues? Because there appeared to have been a major rift, I think by 1993. That cabinet fell apart, the Minister of Finance, yourself, Bodwin Nkumbula and others broke ranks with Dr. Frederick Chiluba.
I've had time to examine that.
Yes.
You know the funny thing? Each one of us resigned for different reasons. We may have made the same statement.
Yeah.
I mean, there is, long after we had resigned, one day Bodwin Nkumbula tells Aka, something I've been trying to ask you for some time. I keep forgetting. I understand why I resigned, because I'm rich.
Yeah.
But why did you resign? You are poor.
You didn't get the job.
But I thought we had resigned for the same reasons.
Yeah.
Okay?
Yeah.
Then, Levi Mwanawasa, when me and Bodwin resigned, was very unhappy with me, particularly me. He really told, no, you can't surrender. You should stay because we need to fight inside. I tried to argue, no, we need to fight inside. So I said, no, we can't fight inside because the divisions that are coming in there are such that we
are outnumbered.
We can't sit outside cabinet to say, oh, as we are going to debate this issue, let us take this position. That opportunity is not, the divisions have nothing to do with such position. They have to simply do whether you are trying to impress Mr. Chiluba, or you are trying to see that you are his greatest defender, you are trying to say you are the greatest fighter against his enemies. So and in any case, the major point I told him, in any case, we don't have side interests. We want to go to cabinet. Each one of us contributes according to your experience, your knowledge, your beliefs as an individual. So that if others are coming there as a team,
with a pocket agenda.
Yes, you can't oppose them, you don't have them. It's the same, you know, the unique way of electing the Central Committee was such in practice that KK came up with 26 names. I think there were 26 names.
Yes.
Which you people have adopted, you PND have adopted. The idea that you just have these bodies who are in the Central Committee, then the president chooses what role to play and he can change them. Now, if you were to oppose, in other words, the major opponent is a slate, you can't oppose it as individual.
You can't win.
So you have to also have a slate. Now, how do you get a slate in a one-party state? You have to go to the branches. By the time you reach branch 2, the whole system knows that an enemy is going around. Even the people you are visiting have been told that you watch out for these enemies. They are meeting in dark corners, blah, blah. So you can't make it.
Yeah.
So it was the same that there is no way. Anyway, that was my position. But anyway, Levy still believed that I was wrong to resign. A few months later, he resigns.
Did you go to visit him?
I was there at his press conference. But then you investigate what was he really resigning over? You see? And what he was resigning over, I mean, in terms of his statement, my statement, Bodwin's statement, it's like the same package of grievances.
Yeah.
But the reality is that
you resigned for various reasons.
let's give an example that one day was acting president, Mr. Chiluba was away. Basically, Mr. Sata, who had been in government a long time, and he knew the system, which many Zambians don't know, that the government of Zambia is a one-man government.
Yeah. You may pretend that you have powers when...
To assume that the number 2, who is vice president, is really number 2 in terms of influence and powers is an illusion. So, of course, Mr. Sata understood that. So, he didn't have any time for respecting the vice president.
He knew who to respect.
Yes, he knew who to respect. So, when the president was not there, he assumes the president is not there. I'll talk to him when he comes back.
Yeah.
So, there was something that Mr. Sata did, or was reported to have been done, due to the information that, because when you're acting president, you may get some of the presidential information. You got that. So Levy, being legalistic, he assumes that while he's acting president, he has presidential responsibility. Well, at least responsibility.
Yeah, correct.
So exercising those responsibilities, he calls Mr. Sata. Mr. Sata refuses to come. He gets annoyed. Then, since the report was negative, he waits for the president and assumes that when he reports to the president with the recommendation that this Sata should be punished, the president, being president, on whose behalf you are taking this responsibility, will support you. Then Mr. Chiluba did not support him. So that was the major annoyance to him. That he discovered that Mr. Chiluba is not interested in taking over his recommendation. He has a different relationship with Mr. Sata. He needs him for a different purpose, which cannot be easily cancelled because Levy was being ignored, or because Mr. Chiluba did something wrong, Mr. Sata did something wrong.
Yeah.
So that now, Guy Scott, Arthur Winner, Mr. Kasonda. Unlike some of us would say, maybe, you may have differed, they never did. They were so respectful and considerate of Mr. Chiluba. They acted like they want to assure him that although they are older than him, although they have more experience than him, they are subordinate to him. So even when in argument, they were very supportive of him. There were no policy differences that they aired. I think that he was just exercising power.
Now, this brings me to, as we begin to wind down, we've looked at 60 years. One of the proposals you've made is a revolutionary approach, where first we decolonize, I think, then we promote education, but also you're concerned about the governance system, because in your summary, this is a one-man run government.
Yes.
All the powers are still deposed in the president,
yes,
and everyone cannot even exercise independence. Then the issue about our detailed planning, which we seem to lack, you've given an example of Singapore and Malaysia, that until we plan to that detail, sometimes even literally in this country now, ethnic and tribal discussions cannot take place. They amount to hate speech. And for me, that has become dangerous, that we cannot have an innocent, sound discussion around issues of ethnic and tribal issues and history of our country.
Yeah, and that is really that is really the crust of the matter. That first we've talked about the Constitution. I think that over the Constitution, over land, and over power sharing, there should be a real people's movement coming up with what their national agenda should be over those. And I would like to see a people's movement, not a political party, because political parties, they are almost condemned to just be limited to the next election. I don't think there's anything you can do to political parties to tell them that forget the next election, let's sort out the country, okay? But if there is a people's movement and a clear national agenda is put forward, it can then be presented to political parties to endorse or oppose. And the people then must decide, if you haven't endorsed our program, forget our vote. Then also to teach the people that please value your vote. I mean, the debasement of the vote is the number one thing that has devalued our program. The other aspect is selectivity. For instance, since independence, we do not have separation of powers between parliament, the executive, and the judiciary. We do not have it. We've never had it. But if we think that this problem started last week, we can't solve it. Because let's take the independence of the judiciary. We are lucky we have a historical illustration which showed that the independence of the judiciary doesn't exist. Because our first Chief Justice resigned.
We literally hounded him out.
Yes. He resigned. And when he resigned, he just went to, and this is an Irishman who had an option not to be Zambian, who chose to support the struggle, and as a result, he was made Chief Justice, but he was a real professional. So when party politics started harassing him, he resigned. The president tried to plead with him to bring him back. He followed him at the airport. There is a very funny picture of the president and the resigned Chief Justice walking towards the plane. So that was an example.
So
that
the president followed Skinner to the airport when Skinner decided to leave.
Yes, he still decided. And then he became Chief Justice of Malawi. Okay. Now, so that now if we are dealing with the present constitutional court crisis, we must realize it's not a constitutional court crisis. It's a judicial crisis. It's a crisis of lack of independence of the judiciary, which has been there all along. This constitutional, why is it there? What problem was I trying to solve? Whose problem was being solved? Whose problem was solved? It's not a national problem. When did Zambia have a problem that the Supreme Court can't deal with constitutional matters? When was that crisis? It never existed. And you can actually build an institution like a constitutional court without reference to the people. No referendum was made. No statement of what was the problem we are trying to cause. No options of how you could solve those problems was made. Now, what made it possible? What makes it possible? What has always made it possible to create a critical institution like that without reference to the people? And the answer is straightforward. Is how Zambians voted in the 1969 referendum, where the majority of Zambians voted to disempower themselves as a people and give their powers over the constitution to a parliament which has always been partisan. It has never been nationalist. So instead of Parliament being given the constitution by the people, now we have a situation where the Parliament gives the constitution to the people. I mean, what sort of thing is that? Instead
I laughed when our dear sister Woneli Muti has been justifying that, in fact, constitutional amendments can be done by Parliament. ECZ has started an electoral reform technical committee. Again, all these are difficult processes. How can a creature of the Constitution begin how to reform itself?
How to reform itself. Yes. Okay. Now, instead of ministers and the cabinet being afraid of Parliament, Parliament is afraid of the cabinet.
Yes.
Instead of judges being the feared entity,
they fear
all
the
of
executive.
us, that they can decide that, yes, you as a Parliament, you have passed this law, but we say it's unconstitutional. They can decide, you as a minister, you have signed this agreement, it's unconstitutional. They can say, you as a citizens have done this and this, but this is unconstitutional. So we should fear them. Instead, they are the ones being frightened.
Yeah, yeah. Do you have hope after the struggle you've waged over the years, after helping our country go multi-party democracy, when you do a reflection, and then as we go forward, you mentioned something very fundamental, that your parents and their generation knew what they wanted. Your generation knew what they wanted. Do you have hope that our young people know what they want, especially in reflection to our country?
That is my major concern, whether the current, sometimes when I say the current gen, I rule myself out, although I'm still around. But the next generation, whether really they've captured what this African independence movement was all about and how critical it is, and the changes that were promised and are needed in the world that created colonialism in order for us to be finally, truly free, and in order for us to be genuine, developed, in order for us to be in charge of our governance and our development truly, not to have a situation where a minister will be scared of the first secretary of an embassy, a foreign embassy, who can tell him how to manage the economy, who can tell him who to appoint. I mean, that is the sort of situation that we have. Hope, I have hope.
Okay.
The day I lose hope, you find the following morning an announcement that I've committed suicide.
Yeah.
So hope we must have. The deeper the problem, the clearer surely the problems must be. My only plea is that let's look at the totality of the problem.
Yeah.
There are situations where the problem is the system. There are problems where the individuals are system. There are problems where both individuals and the system are a problem. And we are in that situation. Both the individuals we have put into leadership, ourselves as individuals, as citizens, are a problem. That's why our first duty is to look in the mirror. What are we doing or not doing which is perpetuating this problem? What can you do which can begin to solve this problem? How does your analysis of the problem, your proposition of the solution, move away from being short-term and personal to being long-term and social, to be inclusive? We need a constitution which is win-win for everybody. We don't need a constitution which makes it easier for Emmanuel to win the election and for me to lose. I will not be happy. It doesn't matter how he puts it, whether he gets the majority in parliament. He will have one unhappy citizen. And sometimes we have a whole group of unhappy citizens. So we need ourselves to change. And this is why we must be part of a national people's movement to change the constitution, to define the land laws, and in a manner that brings back the power over governance to the people, the power over land to the people. I was saying that the third part of it, which is basically power sharing.
Yes.
You know, we have layers of government. There's the government we call central government. There's the government we call local government. But in fact, we have no local government.
Yes, local government is missing.
You see? There was even a proposal lately criticizing the idea that members of parliament are not in the council. I was shocked. They're already in parliament. Why should they
be in the council?
Are we short of people to be in the council? And the idea that agreeing on a program is always a good thing, and disagreeing is a bad thing. Is a terrible idea. Because we want everybody to be free to express their interests. Even if their interests are different from other people's interests, they must be expressed. If the local authority has different program of development agenda, it is all right. It is their program. It's their locality.
Yes.
This CDF business.
Yes.
Actually, I opposed it. I know my comrade Newton Nguni is very proud that we are the ones who proposed. I never supported that idea.
When the MMD tried to introduce CDF in 1996, you attempted to oppose it.
I opposed it.
What was the reason? And
the reason is that you have one treasury. And the members of parliament have a say over that treasure. Now, if we sit that we have a say over this treasure, let's share this money so that when I go home, my wife should think I'm a big guy, that I've brought development. Then, in other words, you're facilitating me to fool people. That if you build a classroom, we'll vote for this MP because he built a 2x4 classroom.
So it's narrow and partisan.
It is terrible. It is actually theft. Because, fortunately, my recent experience, I was in a rural area. It's almost comical. Each time they open a classroom, they kill a beast and celebrate. And people get allowances for attending the ceremony to hand over the school. The MP gets personal credit. Over what? Our public resources.
I've always said, I think
so that basically what we need to do is to power sharing, including over the economy, the finance. Let's have an arrangement where each level of government, and we even probably need a third level of government, should have their share of the tax people, the tax money. And it should be theirs. It should not be a gift from the government. It should not be a gift from the MP. It should not be a gift from the president. It is theirs, and they should have responsibility to manage whatever portion we decide at whatever level of government. Then we also have types of government. You have the central government, which is essentially a creation of colonialism.
Yes.
And you have traditional authorities. Real decolonization means...
And as disempowered as we were under colonial government.
No, it's worse. Because under the colonial government, in the case of Barroso, from the very beginning, there was a treasury. In the 30s, all the native authorities were created with treasury. So there was a portion of tax which went to them. There was a set of responsibilities which included a little infrastructure, a little judiciary, a little so many other things for them to do with that money. Then after independence, you take over. I know the Barrosis think the treasury was taken. And the Zambians think it's only the Barrosi treasury which was taken. The same act which destroyed the Barrosi treasury absorbed it into the main economy.
It did
on the same day,
to the
native authority in Mwansabombwe also was absorbed.
Yes.
Their treasury was absorbed.
Yes, correct.
Okay? But the media and the politics of the day made them focus as if, oh, these Barrosis are disprivileged because the colonialists gave them. So it's good riddance. But they didn't know they were also being disempowered. So that the native authorities were more active in governance before independence and after. Now, what sort of decolonization is that?
In fact, I can't let you go away without attending to this question. You have rendered your voice to traditional authorities, to Barroso in particular. You were recently, His Royal Highness Chief Naliele, where you served. Your father was a Litunga.
Almost for as long as I served in Mr. Chiluba's government. I think 9 and 10 months is the problem.
Yes. I think you are fundamental in approach. You don't want cosmetic changes. You do not want to be a mere flag. I think you want to cause changes. And
yes, I want.
Yeah.
I think
but what should be the role of traditional authorities in our governments? We now have authority now centralized around the president. The traditional rulers are mere symbols who we give small causes and who we need maybe at election time. We've disempowered them. With
at election time, even the president kneels before you.
Yes.
Then in between elections,
you
are
have to
busy
look
kneeling before. Maybe he's not even available to be kneeled
what
before.
What do you think should be really true?
I believe that it's a crucial, there is an outstanding national question. See, this Zambia, this Malawi, this Kenya, these are fake imperialist creations. I don't think they are completely hopeless, but we have to Africanize them. And we have to build them in a linkage with organic structures of traditional authorities. By that I mean that, you see, let's start with the extreme position of Samora Machel, who said in order to build the nation, meaning Mozambique, the tribe must die. And by tribe, he means all these African systems. And which is very disappointing position by Samora Machel, who's supposed to be a revolutionary, against Portuguese colonialism. The cornerstone of
the thinking at the time, I think there was a grappling thought in the 70s of what Samora Machel stated. We see Nyerere, Julius Nyerere, who's literally like a flag bearer for Pan-Africanism, also find difficulties with traditional authorities and proceeds to even abolish them.
And there is... who is this Malawian guy? He died, unfortunately, just before independence. Dunduza Chisiza.
Yeah.
There's even a road named after him in Lusaka.
Yes.
He wrote a book about Africa, what lies ahead. He tackles this issue. He doesn't completely take the position of
Nyerere,
of Samora, but basically he thinks that the future should be of a disappearing traditional authority. Okay? And this to me is the problem that will cause us not to ever build these nations. Yeah.
So there are nostalgic thoughts.
My thinking.
Yeah. Before you come to that, sir, there are these nostalgic thoughts. A lot of people feel we should go back to traditional authorities, empower them, give them real power. The others, like Nyerere and Samora Machel, felt probably we need to fathom a new model. So I think they compare the two.
I think first let's recognize that there are two African nationalism. You see, normally when you talk about African nationalists, you are talking about people fighting for nations created by imperialism. Okay? So that I call it non-indigenous African nationalism. It is African nationalism to want Kenya to be independent, to fight for Kenyan independence. I don't think that's inherently wrong, to want Zambia to be independent. But it is also correct that there is indigenous African nationalism. Yeah. Nations which predate colonialism, which are organically African. So one can fight for the nationhood of traditional African societies. And the idea that one, particularly the non-indigenous nationalism, is the sole legitimate and sole representative authority of Africans, and that the indigenous African nationalism is inherently regressive or negative and should be done away with. Either the Nyerere way announced it's abolished, or the Zambian way hope that it will disappear. Yeah. None of them work. Because even in Tanzania, in fact, that Nyerere position has strengthened the traditional authorities that are genuine. The only traditional authorities that followed Nyerere's declaration that they should disappear are the fake ones created by the Germans. Yeah. Like Nyerere's own father was a chief, but a chiefdom created in the Shimabuku fashion by Europeans who say the structure you have is a non-structure. We have to structure you.
We have to give you a chief.
Yeah. So they had difficulties with that. The same way that these imperialists had difficulties with Gaddafi, because Gaddafi refused to form the standard European state. He went to the UN and said, I'm not head of state. Yeah. I'm not president. I'm just head of...
I'm just privileged to be
here to represent my people. And today you present someone, this is, the foreign ministers are in meeting in Addis Ababa. Okay, you go. Sit in the seat of the foreign minister for Libya. But if there's another meeting at the same time, another guy can go and sit there. So this became difficult. So they created chiefdom. Now those fake ones they created are the ones that disappeared. The real ones, which are in southeast Tanganyika, are stronger than our traditional authority, because since that pronouncement, they've never required a penny from government. Yeah. So they've sustained themselves
and become properly
and become proper authorities run by their own people. Okay? Now, the Machel statement is just a statement. What is this war in Mozambique all about?
It's about resources.
Yes, because you have them, is not even your normal Bantu traditional authorities. These are religious Islamic groups who have been there for centuries, that they have to be accepted as indigenous, religious as they are, Islamic as they are. And they are saying They are challenging the authority legitimacy
To
of
exploit
this
that
government left by the Portuguese. So that there is need for a discussion. In the case of Zambia, I think ours
I have argued about Zambia.
is even simpler.
I've argued about Zambia, that Zambia is a collection of nations.
Yes.
The Barroso was a nation.
Yes.
You know, if you look at Gawaundi, his nation extends to Malawi,
Yes.
to Mozambique. Barroso extended way up to Namibia and Angola. These were nations brought together under statehood, you know, the members, similar expansion.
Yes.
The Mwata, his people
And
are still
you
across
see,
the DRC.
I've told a very high authority among our traditional leaders, not the Barroso, the other one, that, you know, there's this picture of KK standing, getting out of an aeroplane at the top of the stairs, waving, saying, "I've brought you independence." Have we ever asked, where did he get it from? Since he brought it, have we, the members, the Barrosis, the Chewas, sat down to say, now that we are in one country, how do we live together? Have we had that dialogue?
No, we haven't had.
You
We
can see the level of uncertainty and insecurity and discomfort when Mwine Lubemba came to Komboka. Because it's almost as if this neo-colonial government structure left to us after independence
He's threatened.
is hoping that we can't dialogue among ourselves without it. And this is why it can't finance us to be independent. It can finance you to sustain you. If they like you, they'll give you bread. And if they don't like you, they'll tell you we threaten bread. One of my problems, which made me a problem to the Zambian government, and I don't regard my departure as having to do with the quarrel with the Barroso government. It's the Zambian government. They got a chief who cannot be bought, because at my age, there's no amount of money that will make me say what I don't believe in. There's nothing I want.
Yeah.
I'm not looking for a car. I've lived many years with cars. So it doesn't work. Then you can't threaten me because I'm not afraid of dying. So, so it doesn't, and you can't cheat me. I know too much.
Yeah.
In fact, when they tried to cheat me, they've taught me so much which I didn't know. This is why I'm bringing this issue of land. It's very critical.
Yeah.
We have to re-examine all these land resettlement schemes. They are not in the interest of natives. The idea that if you build a classroom, government, using our tax money, builds a classroom, and they make a condition that once we've built this classroom, this land must be given back to the state. Why? Even Munali had no title deed. It produces all those people who went to cabinet. The Barroso National School produced people it didn't have. Mbeleshi produced people it didn't have a title deed. So what is it they want? What is the purpose of a school? How does the title deed assist us to the purpose of the school? Then they may answer that, no, if you have a title deed, you can borrow. Why should the title deed, borrowing be allowed? Ian Smith, whom we think was a racist, 1971, passed a law forbidding banks from using traditional African land as collateral, but still insisted that they should still give loans. If you give a loan to a tractor, you talk about how the tractor will give you security, how the crop will give you security. It is not the God-given law that every loan must come with a land
title.
No. That can be changed overnight. If they can create a constitutional court without referring to the people, they can make all these banks that, yes, you can give loans and you must give loans to our farmers in the rural areas. But we don't want to hear that you are asking for title deeds. You follow your projects you are financing. Make sure they are run properly.
In fact, to commercial farmers, their security is the crop you are going to grow.
Yes. Yeah. So, in other words, the purpose of these conditions being brought about is really dispossessing natives of their land. When a traditional authority gives land for government to have a settlement scheme, the government continues to get paid lease. Those who've looked after this land up to that point get nothing except for these transitional bribes.
You've raised a very fundamental issue of settlement schemes. Government has created 1 million hectares of farming block to promote agriculture, bring a commercial farmer and maybe do, agro-processing with a local community or do outgrower scheme. You are saying this is a difficult approach because it's dispossessing these large tracts of land.
For instance, let's take the cattle industry. Just like you can have a policy of free education, free health services, you can have a policy of national free veterinary services. Okay. Because when these diseases spread among cattle, they can spread anywhere. So it's a national issue. Okay? So those are the type of assistance you can give. Here they are with the food reserve. If you guarantee a market for everything that is grown and you don't make people have to form fake cooperatives, all sorts of funny conditions which are not necessary. Just say, if you bring a bag of maize, we'll buy it. Cash. That is assistance. Now, if you say that for me to give you fertilizer, which again needs to be examined, why are we still promoting chemical agriculture? People in the Central Province, in Barotseland, in Northern Province, in Central Province, they've seen the movement of people who used to farm in Southern Province. Why are they moving? Yeah. What killed that land? It's fertilizer. Up to 1970 or so, the whole urban area was being fed maize from 600 white farmers. This is why in Zambia for a very long time, until the last 10 years, when you talk about a commercial farmer, you meant a white farmer. They were feeding. And that maize in the 60s, in the 50s, in the 40s, had no chemical fertilizer. Now they're even trying to bring these rules criminalizing our own indigenous seeds.
A bill has just been passed in Kenya where you have to grow licensed fruits and vegetables from licensed
and whichever
seeds.
African country,
and we have a similar bill.
Whichever African country has some puppet like Ruto who come up with this policy.
We have it
because they are
well.
coming from the same source, the same interest. I think in my book, Milk in the Basket, the title is about dependency, underdevelopment, and disarticulation. So these policies make dependency a norm. They have the effect of underdeveloping our people in terms of your power over the inputs to your agriculture. If you don't have that power, you are underdeveloped. Then we have to be hooked to a global system in which we are totally powerless.
Yeah. I was laughing yesterday. The head of state was receiving, I think, some investor who's putting up a cholera vaccine factory. I said, look, cholera, we know what the issue is. It's just the issues of water and sanitation. And provide that. You don't need vaccines. You remove the debt that causes.
Which means the day you clean up, the business goes down.
Yeah.
So his business interest is in what?
In
not
keeping
cleaning
the
up?
place dirty, yes.
Yes. And did we sit down of what is our problem?
Yeah.
And what are the optional solutions? What of that solution can we do for ourselves? What of that solution do we absolutely need from outside?
Yeah.
If we need that, for how long? When does that dependence on that aspect of the solution come?
Yeah. Boaka, we have to end there. I wish I could have a second bite. You have so much, but I love your proposals for the future. That in the next 60 years, there are certain things we have to do, including immediately a people's movement, outside politics, outside political parties, where people come to interrogate what the problem is and propose detailed solutions. Then maybe the people's movement can then look for a political candidate or political party to support, but it should be outside these partisan narrow interests of political parties. What would be your last words? And as we go towards the next 60 years, what do we see that can be done better?
I think where one of the area of weaknesses, which we have not covered, I think maybe we covered it a little bit,
yes,
is to be very consistent. Focus on what is wrong, not who is wrong.
Okay.
First, focus on what is wrong. And if it is wrong, please condemn it regardless of how much you love the wrongdoer. Because otherwise you are going to have wrongdoers, some wrongdoers being fought, others being encouraged. So we have a not outcome. So I think that is our challenge. And to re-examine our history in terms of everything you see wrong, examine its history. As I say, this court system, let's go down. When did it begin to be wrong? This idea also, maybe it's a new subject. It's wrong to start a new subject. This practice that has now become institutionalized, that after every election, you form a new civil service, then to a political party. Our failure to kill the one-party idea that a majority party, a ruling party, owns the government. Even the very terminology, UPN government, PF government, MMD government, these are wrong. They can never be. They can only be a national government. So that even if you do not belong to a ruling party, your demand of services from that you must be absolutely free, like regardless who wins the next election. Your educational service, your health service, your road service, your access to contracts must not be influenced by your party affiliation. I think on that score, we are really gotten ourselves into muddy water from which we must get out.
Wonderful. Your books, you are a prolific writer, and I know you are a prolific reader too. Where can we get these books?
That is another challenge for my capitalist friend. Please, we need a publishing industry. It is not efficient for authors to be publishing themselves, marketing themselves, editing themselves. So that is a real shortage. Now we have to depend. They are available every now and then with Bookworld, but the conditions they are demanding are not very awkward. Sometimes they just want 5 books. And one would like a situation where there is a real bookshop. And also in Zambia, although the situation has improved a little bit, we don't have enough local books.
No.
I think it's the only country where you go into a bookshop, even cookery books, foreign cookery books are more than local cookery books. Diet books talk about foods that we don't have, and so on. So there's that challenge. Otherwise, we are trying. I'm trying very hard, but I'm beginning to recognize. That's why I appreciate very, very much this invitation you extended to me, that our people are not very much into reading.
Yeah.
So those of us who have messages, yes, we should write because the book is good for records, but we must also look at ways in which we can represent what is in the book, whether it's bits of it in podcast or bits and
or
bits
series,
in series. I think we are challenged to do that.
Yes.
Because it's so important, like the books you are holding, let's say the one you have first is actually by my sister. I think.
African Indigenous Lifetime Child Development.
Yeah.
Living How to Live in Pre-Colonial Baroseland, Bulozi. This was done by Dr. Emmanuel Mbikusita-Lewanika, your own distinguished sister. She has her own very successful life. The Land Question and Development Answers, Perspective and Future Aspiration. This is your book, Akashambatwa Mbikusita-Lewanika. I have the national question of African indigenous nationalism, bastion of resistance in Baroseland. You're very passionate about the question of Baroseland. Akashambatwa.
No, I'm more passionate about indigenous Africa.
Baroseland
is just a case study.
Yes, correct.
Yeah, but otherwise the topic really is the question of the fate of indigenous African systems, not only of governance, but of everything.
Also indigenous knowledge.
Yes,
yeah,
indigenous knowledge,
there are a lot of
land
things.
management.
Yes.
Like this climate change fad, that almost everything they are proposing is African culture. But they are now repackaging it as if we should
knew how to keep our trees. We knew how to keep our natural resources.
Yes, I mean, they went to war against Temene, misrepresenting it. But now they are recognizing that that's the way we should be. But now you have to go to a workshop
to get that knowledge.
to get our knowledge. So
political economy of Zambia, 1990.
This is a new version
end
of
the one-party state. Yeah, this is a revision of milk in the basket. Yeah, and the soul of Barose people, a heritage of land, labor, livelihood, and forward by Hicks Skazwe. Beautiful book. And Barose National Library. I think this is an example of, this was a magazine, yes.
Yes. So these are the alternative way of presenting. It's easier for people to read magazines.
Yes.
But still, it faces the problem of our reading culture.
Any book in the works?
Yes. Yes.
There's a book on the way?
As many.
And now that as you frolic with grandchildren, you can choose to read them over.
Yes.
Make audio books. You can even do video books.
Yes.
Just let the camera run and speak to the chapters. It's a new way of reaching our young people.
No, in fact, we have to take advantage of this new technology.
Yeah.
Because waiting for people who've been brought up on cell phones.
Yes, yes.
To learn to read. Like me, I mean, I have to read.
Yes, yes.
I can't sleep without any given time.
Yes,
but we have
yes.
to recognize that our new generation may need other media.
Yes, yes. No, wonderful. I would like to thank you for spending time with us. I think this was a valuable podcast, and our viewers will truly enjoy it. Today I was featuring Mr. Akashambatwa Mbikusita-Lewanika. He's an academic, is a researcher, is an author, is a political activist, he's founder of the MMD, and is a prolific commentator. And you shouldn't slow down, sir. You shouldn't slow down. We need those thoughts. And I hope you enjoyed it. You can watch this. We know there's a lot of load shedding, but you can watch it on YouTube and on our social media pages to get this wealth of knowledge that we looked at Zambia through